Hi, everybody. I want to welcome everybody that's watching on, of course, our Facebook feed. We're doing Facebook Live today, and we're also putting these things up on our YouTube channel, so you'll see them there. And I like doing it. We're doing a little differently today. We're going to go for the full half hour. We're not going to do some of the breaks, and we got a lot to talk about. We're going to be talking about passwords, and there is a whole new standard that just came out that we'll start seeing towards the end of this year. We'll talk a little bit about that and passwords and what you can do today. A great article came out this week, and you might have heard about this guy, this killer in California. He was a serial killer, and I remember him because my wife and I were living in California at the time. So we'll talk about opting out of databases, and then in this case, can you even opt out? Because frankly, we got a serious problem here because he didn't opt in. Company ZTE, you've heard of those guys? Huawei, big news this week about them and what the federal government was doing there. And we got to talk about Amazon's deal with China being really quite a disaster when it comes to our national security. So here we go.
On the front lines and ahead of the trends in business and consumer technology, speaking with the top minds and creators behind the products and ideas that help to drive our everyday lives.
Dean Kamen is joining us now. He's the inventor of the Segway and the founder of US First. Steve Forbes, I appreciate what you've been doing with Forbes magazine for all these years. It's one of my first go-to places. We're going to talk right now with the guys and gals behind Siri. We're joined right now by the director of Kindle technology. We're joined right now by the CEO of eBates, Kevin Johnson.
On air for more than 15 years, over 20 million podcast downloads. This is Tech Talk with Craig Peterson.
All right, that's my cue. Welcome to everybody. We are so glad we have you here. We're doing a few things different that you'll notice. Make sure you're signed up to my email list. You'll find that at craigpeterson.com. Easy to sign up. We have about, almost 5,000 people that I email every week with the latest tech tips, the things you and we need to know in order to keep ourselves and frankly, in order to keep our family safe. And safe is where it's at nowadays, right? So go there, craigpeterson.com right now. I'm also still sending out SMS messages to remind people about urgent updates. I just sent one out last week about Windows 10, a huge hole in Windows. You remember we talked about Microsoft and how they have their patch Tuesdays once a month because people were complaining there were too many patches to install. So now when they have a patch that's out of sequence, if you will, that's not part of this big patch bundle, people have to look at it and look twice. Well, we're looking at it many times because Microsoft tried to fix a bug that was introduced by our friends over at Intel. And this Intel bug turned out to be a very big deal. And frankly, it's kind of a scary thing because this Intel bug allowed programs that were well crafted to be able to get at memory within the machine. Now, that meant that it could get it out of their program memory, could get, in fact, at kernel memory, so it could see all your passwords. Yeah, thanks, Intel, right? And Intel licensed their technology to another couple of manufacturers who have the same problem. Well, Microsoft tried to fix that problem, and they weren't able to fix it, not well at all. So the Microsoft problem has become our problem because if you're using Windows 10, you are completely out of luck. There is a patch that's out now for the latest version of Windows 10. It's going to come out for all of the versions and all of the older versions of Windows, including Windows 8.1 and 8 and 7, because they just completely blew it. But they particularly blew it with this latest version of Windows 10. So I send those messages out to people so hey, you got to work now because frankly, if you don't do this little bit of work, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. And I only send them to people who are on my text list. So if you want to get those messages telling you about the latest, greatest worstest pieces of software that are out there. You're going to have to go online or to my website and sign up, but you can't sign up from my tech site there. You can only sign up by picking up your phone, get that smartphone out and open up to the texting app that you have. Once you're in that texting app, then go ahead and make a little text message to me, 855-385-5553. Easy enough to get to, 855-385-5553. And if you text me your email address, I'll also add you onto my email list. Or, it just makes it simple. Or again, just go into your texting app. You can send, me any message, any question, tell me something, ask me something. We often answer during the show so that you have the ability to, get questions answered right away. But we don't always. Again, any questions, 855-385-5553. So we have a few things we got to talk about. And as I said, we're doing things a little differently today, and we're going to continue to be a little different as we continue to change the show. We're trying to make it a little better, more interesting, more interactive. So that also means we're kind of going into the offline, off the air space as well. We're having webinars. We got more planned. We're going to be talking about the whole password issue. We're going to be talking about this article that came out last week. You'll find up on my website, which is the best antivirus out there. And it isn't the normal antivirus. I'm going to be interviewing the PC-matic people. I'm also going to be interviewing all of the people that come up with some of these new technologies for protecting us. Because as you know, that's something I do for businesses. But I realize that individual people out there, normal listeners, as well as very small businesses, can't afford the types of software and hardware that they need. So we're going to be talking about how you can put together the best security that you can afford. And that includes free security, right? So we'll be going through that, and we're going to be doing that offline. But today I want to talk a little bit about this whole new World Wide Web Consortium password standard that they've got. So the history of passwords goes way, way back. You probably remember that. And I've been using passwords since the 1970s, early 70s. And many of us have used them on a daily basis since we got online, right? But passwords just aren't terribly secure. So number one rule, you should be using a password manager. And there's a number out there that you can use that I think you might like. Number two, you should be coming up with good passwords. Nowadays, that doesn't mean alphanumeric and special characters and stuff. Nowadays, we've realized that the best passwords are small phrases. String 3 or 4 words together. Use that as your password. And we'll be doing a special whole webinar, I think, on that. And we might even have a training course on that we come up with. But the World Wide Web Consortium establishes standards, and they've come up with a new one called WebAuthn, WEBAUTHN. Now, this is a standard for programmers to use. And the idea here is they don't want you to have to type your password in, right? Because if you type it into your keyboard, guess what? It could be captured, right? Look at my keyboard. This is a Bluetooth keyboard, and this is what I use when I'm recording the show. Potentially, it could be captured, right, between my keyboard and my computer, and they know what I typed. You can install keyboard loggers. You can maybe even break into an SSL connection using a man-in-the-middle attack. So how do you deal with that? How do you try and keep yourself safe? Well, what they're doing is using public key cryptography to make it so you don't have to do any of that nasty stuff. You can just go online, you go to a website. If the website's programmed properly, it will automatically authorize you. And of course, you have to do something as well, because the best security is something you know, along with something you have. Okay, so we got to remember that as we go forward. This is going to help with online shoppers. In fact, it should be ready for the whole Thanksgiving, Christmas shopping scene where we do so much of our shopping, Black Friday this year. At least that's the speculation, because Google, Microsoft, and Firefox, Mozilla, they're already committed to supporting the standard. And developers have already begun to implement it in Windows, Mac, Linux, Chrome OS, and Android. And it's a promising trend. They're trying to keep secret. And can you ask for anything more? I'm not sure that you can. All right, here we go. We're going to go on here to about opting out of your data and data sharing. Does it make sense? Can you even really do it? Okay, now you might have heard of this guy, the Golden State Killer, and let me just quickly, I'm going to switch cameras for those of you that are watching so you can kind of see this article a little bit. And here's this guy. This is an old guy sitting in a wheelchair here in a courthouse, right? You might have seen this particular picture before. And this is by Randy Pench up at the Sacramento Bee, this photograph. But this guy terrorized California. I remember it well. His last known murder was in 1986, the same year that DNA profiling was used in an investigation for the first time. And that's where the privacy conundrum comes in, right? You have privacy, right? Okay. You think you have privacy, right? Do you really have privacy? Well, you can decide to share something with someone. You can go onto Facebook and share all kinds of information that might not be good for you to share, right? Some of this stuff's come back to bite us before. People have posted stuff out on the open internet, out on Twitter, which is, of course, much more open. In fact, we're going to be doing a special FBI briefing that I'll be holding here. I think it's the 27th of the month. Anyhow, if you're involved with the FBI InfraGard program, we're going to be talking about this whole idea of open source information. Now think about that for a minute, because about open source. We use open source software all of the time. My computer has open source software. If you're using Android, it's full. It's mostly open source software. And that means that it's software anybody can use and potentially modify. There's lots of different rules based on the contract. But anyways, that's what open source software is. Open source information is information that's out there on the internet and widely available. Now, that includes things like the Secretary of State's reports. They know when you voted, how often you voted. They know what party you're affiliated with, right? We all know that. But it also includes information about our car. What car do we have? How old is it? Because whoever it is who lent you the money put a lien on it. And that lien is sitting up there at the Secretary of State's office. The county records, like for your home. You got a home, right? Or someone owns the house or apartment you're living in. That information is open source information. So is the information that you're putting out onto Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest, right? Those are pretty much all open. You can do closed channels on those, but they're pretty much open. Facebook is not that open, but law enforcement can get their hands on it. Well, the briefing that we're holding for the FBI about the FBI InfraGard is about these people's information that's out on the internet and how it can be compiled and how, frankly, whole profiles about people are being put together based on your open source information, the stuff that's just out there. Now, how does this tie into Joseph James D'Angelo, who's the suspected Golden State Killer? Well, this is interesting because he's a retired police officer. He kind of knew how to hide, right? How to keep underneath the radar. And he did that for a lot of years. He was just living out in the open right there in California. And what's kind of interesting about this story is the privacy concerns. Because he did not share his DNA, although DNA is being used to convict him of those crimes. Now think about that for just a minute. He's being convicted of crimes using DNA, but they don't have his DNA. So how does that work? How can they convict him of a crime using DNA if they don't have his DNA? Well, obviously they can't convict him of it. But how did they find him? Well, they found him through open source information. They found him because they found his DNA out there online. Why? Well, a family friend had convinced a family member that maybe they wanted to find some other family members who are out there. In fact, I've got a story about a friend of mine, and this friend, Gary, he's adopted, and he wanted to find his family, right? Do I have other family members here, living around here? So he went ahead and did one of those DNA tests that, like Ancestry.com has, that lets you find your family members. And there's others out there too. You can take for instance, your 23andMe DNA test, and you can run it through some of these sites. And the idea is they look for commonalities in DNA and say, well, this person might be a cousin, etc. In fact, he found some cousins living right by where he's living, if that isn't odd enough, right? Well, in this case, the DNA of a relative was found online. And when they did the search for the DNA, and it was just kind of a stab in the dark, right? They had some DNA from the crime scene. They reanalyzed it because DNA research is much better nowadays, and our ability to detect it, we hardly need anything in order to come up with a good DNA match. So his information now wasn't on the database, but a relative of his was, which was enough for the police to have a look a little closer at that family, found him, and looking at the records of the murders, he was in the areas at the time, in the general area. They got a court order, they got his DNA, and now he's in real trouble, okay? So even if you do your searches from using Epic, for instance, and DuckDuckGo or one of these other privacy browsers and website search sites out there, even if you put tape over your webcams, it doesn't really matter here, right? Because without fail, your personal data has probably been collected and stored. And that's why it's so important to have a good dark web report done. And that's not the type that most of these places are offering. But anyways, a good dark web report done, and follow your credit and your credit rating and all of that stuff. And I gotta follow up. I think I mentioned this last week. In fact, I did. That's when I told my wife on the air that someone opened a credit card in my name, which was frankly not something I was expecting. And I was probably part of the 143 million people who lost their data with Equifax last year. Oh, it's absolutely crazy here. So we got to think about online privacy, and we got to think about it in a little bit of a different way. Frankly, in maybe a very big different way. Okay, here we're going to go on now to ZTE. This is crazy. Well, I mentioned Huawei, and I also mentioned ZTE here a few weeks ago, because the Pentagon had put in effect some orders telling the military to not use their equipment. Now, obviously, don't use their equipment means don't use their equipment, right? And they even banned it at like the local NEX, the Navy PX store. They banned them from sale on all military bases. They couldn't be bought under federal contracts. And the reason was that we thought that maybe the Chinese were able to use this to gain access to confidential information. And in fact, it looks like that is exactly what has happened, that the Chinese have been using it. Well, just this week, our friends over at ZTE basically filed for bankruptcy. They're saying they still have cash, they can still make the phones, but the chipsets that they were using that are controversial, that the Pentagon is complaining about, those chipsets are sole sourced. So they can't buy them from anybody else. And since they can't get the chipsets from anyone else, and since the US has basically stopped buying Huawei and ZTE phones, they might as well shut down. So they filed some paperwork this week in order to really shut down their operations. It's a shame. It's frankly a very big shame. But here's the statement straight from the U.S. Department of Defense. Huawei, which is spelled Huawei, in case you ever wondered how to pronounce that, Huawei. One of the people that works for me fixed my pronunciation. It is Huawei. Huawei and ZTE devices may pose an unacceptable risk to department's personnel, information, and mission, Army Major Dave Eastburn, a Pentagon spokesman, said. In light of this information, it was not prudent for the department's exchanges to continue selling them to Defense Department personnel. Military personnel should be mindful of security risks posed by the use of Huawei and ZTE phones if they choose to buy them elsewhere for their personal use, which the military cannot control. Well, it looks like ZTE is not a problem anymore either, because it looks like they're going to shut down their operations. We'll see what happens with that. But the FBI Director Christopher Wray had said that Huawei and ZTE products could provide the capability to conduct undetected espionage. Now, if that's not a big deal, I don't know what is. Huawei is the third largest smartphone maker in the world, and ZTE is the fourth largest seller of phones in the U.S. So we don't really know how many of these phones are banned, but we do know that they are banned, and that you really shouldn't be using them. Okay, so we're going to do our quick roundup now, because there's just not enough time in the show to cover everything. Okay, so first up in our quick round, a criminal gang used a drone swarm to obstruct an FBI hostage raid. Now, our military is working a lot on these swarms and swarm technology. And for the military standpoint, it's great because you can have a lot of these small little drones come in and attack someone. It's just kind of a terrible thought. Can you imagine that? Bad enough being attacked by wasps or killer bees. Imagine a swarm of drones. While in Denver, Colorado, in the outskirts of a city out there, an FBI hostage rescue team had set up an elevated observation post trying to assess an unfolding situation. And they started hearing the buzz of small drones, and then all of these drones were hovering around them, swooping past them, high speed, low passes. And the agents were trying to flush them out, and they couldn't, okay? And the result, according to Joe Mazzell, said we were then blind. It definitely presented challenges. So this incident is still considered law enforcement sensitive, Mazzell said on Wednesday. This is all from an open article, by the way. I'm not telling you anything I can't tell you. But it shows how criminal groups are using small drones for increasing elaborate crimes. So we're already familiar with drones being used for house break-ins. If there's a drone flying around outside your house, or a drone flying around your business. So anyways, we are out of time. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week, and visit us online, craigpeterson.com. And you can text me, and I'll keep you up to date on the absolute latest, greatest, 855-385-5553.